I've always thought I was a bit like Peter, and some years ago I spent quite a lot of time pondering about Peter and wondering what it must have been to be him. And I wrote a little vignette, and I would like to share that with you this morning. Sitting in a prison cell waiting to be crucified certainly makes you think about the ups and downs of your life, things you'd wished you'd done, things you'd wished you hadn't. What a journey it's been since I met Jesus. I can still remember the day I met him as if it was yesterday. I was busy minding my own business, mending my fishing nets after a long and fruitless night's fishing. He asked if he could use my boat as the crowds were pressing in on him, as he was teaching them, and he was in danger of being either squashed or driven into the Lake of Galilee. I'm no scholar, but there was something about the way he spoke that drew me to listen to him while I was doing my mending. I wondered who this man was. He spoke with great authority, but in a way that was full of compassion. And what he said made a great deal of sense to me. We fishermen don't take kindly to people telling us how to do our jobs, particularly people who aren't fishermen. But when he told me to go out into deep water again and put out my nets, despite the fact that we'd been out all night and had caught nothing, I knew I would be a fool not to listen. And boy, was I right. The fish were almost jumping into the boat. We'd never had such a big catch. I had to call over to my mates in the boat next door to come and share the load, or the nets would have torn in two. I knew then that I was right when I'd felt that there was something special about this man. It frightened me, but at the same time, I was very drawn to him. There was something very pure about him. It was as if a light from him shone on all the dark parts inside me. I wanted to stay near him, but felt there was too big a gap between him and me. I was suddenly able to see all the not-so-good things about myself. I told him to go away and leave me alone. However, when I protested, he spoke to me with such gentleness and told me not to be afraid. He told me to follow him. Me, a fisherman, follow this rabbi? How crazy was that? Rabbis usually take only the best of the best of the best, those who studied since they were little to learn the scriptures inside out and back to front. He was me, a simple, uneducated man, and this amazing teacher was asking me to become one of his followers. I wondered what he meant when he said, "From now on, you will fish for people." But I didn't care. My feet hardly touched the ground when I set off after him, and walking off and leaving everything that I'd worked for my whole life to build up seemed the most natural thing in the world. I wasn't the only one who sensed that this man was something special. James and John, who used to work with me, were also invited to follow him, and they too left everything and went. I wonder if we would have been so quick to follow him if we could see where the road we were setting out on would end. However, I've always been one of those blokes who jumps first and thinks afterwards. Sometimes this gets me into terrible trouble, but at least I can't say that I let things pass me by. It's like that time when we were out in the boat. He'd sent us on ahead of him to cross the lake while he went up into the hills to pray. He did a lot of that, disappearing into the hills to pray on his own. The weather had been fine when we set off, but it was one of those squalls that can quickly blow up on the lake. I was already worried because the waves were tossing the boat about and I thought we would take on too much water. On top of that, when I looked up, I thought I saw a ghost walking on the water. We were flipping terrified. However, because Jesus had just fed 5,000 people and I'd come to expect him to do crazy things, the thought suddenly flashed through my head that it might be him. I called out to him, Lord, if it is you, order me to come out on the water to you. He did. And in my usual foolhardy manner, I climbed out of the boat and set off towards him. However, after I'd taken a couple of steps and left the safety of the boat, I saw how choppy the water was, and I suddenly realized what I'd done, and I started to sink. It was a good job he was near enough to me by then to grab me and save me. When we'd both got into the boat, the wind died down. He seemed sad that we still didn't get what he was about. Our faith just wasn't big enough for the job. But even with all that, he didn't give up on us. He kept on trying to teach us. Do you remember I told you that sometimes my mouth says things that my brain hasn't authorized? Well, one day we were up in Caesarea Philippi. It's quite a scary place because it's a famous Roman town that's known for its waters, and it's a shrine to the Greek god Pan. It obviously set Jesus thinking, and he suddenly asked us who we thought he was. Bit of an odd question that was, and we weren't sure how to answer. The others told him that they'd heard people suggest that he might be Elijah or one of the prophets. But he pressed us and said, "But you, what about you? Who do you think I am?" Before I could stop myself, I suddenly blurted out, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." I had no idea where this had come from. But he told me it was the Holy Spirit within me. What I said must have been the right answer, as he suddenly decided to give me a new name. I'd always been Simon, but he told me I was Peter, which means rock. And then he said, "On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it." I hadn't a clue what he was on about. We'd walked with him for a long time and seen him do all sorts of amazing things like healing people and raising people from the dead. But we still weren't sure what it was all about. Soon after this, he began to talk about how he was going to go to Jerusalem, where he would suffer much at the hands of the chief priests and the elders, and then be put to death. But 3 days later, he would rise again. I couldn't bear the thought that he wouldn't be with us anymore, and I told him I would protect him to make sure this didn't happen. He didn't like that, and he said, "Get away from me, Satan." Satan? How about that then? That was a bit of fall from grace, wasn't it? Peter the rock 1 minute and Satan the next. The truth was, we were still hoping that he was going to be the Messiah, the mighty liberator that had been talked about for generations, who was going to free the Jews from Roman oppression and give us back our own land. I can see now that that wasn't what he was all about. But that's the downside of picking thick fishermen to be your key men. We're a bit slow. I think he picked such a motley crew as us to show that he came for everyone. In our gang, we had those who were clever and those who weren't, those who read books and those who only read the clouds, and several in between. When I left, I had no idea what I was doing. He said, "Follow me," and I set off without thinking what it might involve. To follow me is to be with me and watch me. To follow me is to see the vision and embrace it as your own. To follow me is to hear my words and speak them as your own. Believe me, it's taken nearly all of the time since I met Jesus to learn this. I've told you about the good things that I was blessed with, so it's only fair that I share the worst thing that happened to me on my journey. It still sort of makes me want to hang my head in shame, but I know he's forgiven me, so I'm still working on forgiving myself. It's also been one of the key lessons in learning about what following him meant. It happened when Jesus was arrested. Well, actually, it started before then, when we were in the garden in the Mount of Olives. Jesus had said to us, "All of you will run away and leave me, for the scripture says, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I am raised to life, I will go ahead of you to Galilee." I was horrified when he said this. I just couldn't imagine that I would ever desert him after all we'd been through together. Again I blurted out, "I'll never leave you, even though all the rest do." He went on to say, "I tell you that before the rooster crows 2 times tonight, you will say 3 times that you do not know me." This really upset me, and I told him in no uncertain terms, "I will never say that, even if I have to die with you." Well, you can guess what's coming, can't you? When they took him away to be questioned in the high priest's house in the wee small hours of the night, I followed him, but at a distance because I wasn't sure what was going to happen. It was a cold night, and they had a fire in the courtyard to keep the guards warm. I got cold after a while, so I moved to the fire to thaw myself out a bit. One of the high priest's servants' women came up to me and said, "You too were with Jesus of Nazareth." I was frightened because there were guards all around and I didn't want to be captured like Jesus. So I said, "Don't know what you're talking about." And in an attempt to avoid further questions, I went out to the entrance in the courtyard. However, another servant woman saw me and said to the men there, "He was with Jesus of Nazareth." I'm ashamed to admit that I denied it again, saying, "I swear, I don't know the man." After another little while, the men standing there came to me. "Of course you're one of them. After all, the way you speak gives you away." I shouted at him that I didn't know the man, and straight after, a rooster crowed. And I remembered what Jesus had said to me. "Before the rooster crows twice, you will say 3 times that you do not know me." I was destroyed. I really thought I was made of better stuff than that, but when it came to the crunch, I just crumbled like your average bloke would. This haunted me for weeks, and even now I still smart a bit when I think about it. However, Jesus must have known I was carrying this heavy burden, because when he rose from the dead and before he went back to be with his dad in heaven, we had this weird conversation, which ended up putting everything right. After we'd finished eating, Jesus said to me, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Notice I was back to being Simon here, no sign of the superstar Peter. It immediately took me back to that time when I had protested my love for him, but then let him down. So it was a bit in fear and trembling that I said, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He then said, "Feed my lambs," which confused me a bit. He asked me the same question again, and when I gave the same answer, he said, "Take care of my sheep." The funny thing is that Greek has a number of different words for different types of love that you don't have in English. When Jesus was asking me if I loved him, he was using the word agape, that means a selfless love that gives but expects nothing in return.